My good friend David Barton is here. He has a new book out called The Jefferson Lies, exposing the myths you've always believed about Thomas Jefferson. He's also the founder and president of Wall Builders, and Wall Builders has done exceptional work in this country. And David, when we save the country, a lot of that credit in the afterlife, I think, is going to go to you.
Wow,
you and your wife, Cheryl, are amazing, and your staff at Wall Builders. You have been fighting this fight for a long time, and I'm going to share with the audience in a couple of weeks a timeline idea that came to me, and I think this has happened several times in the last 200 years, and it's always saved by the same kind of people holding up the founders. And I don't think we'd be able to do it if it wasn't for you. I really don't. I really don't.
God's been real gracious to bring stuff to our path, and we kind of made a covenant with Him that if He'd bring it across our path, we'd grab it and hold it and preserve it. And so that's what's kind of built that library. And so I'm amazed at what comes across our path, but I'm convinced that's because He wants it saved and preserved for the country.
I showed you, I believe the same thing. I showed you some stuff that I just got today. I didn't buy any of that, David.
Oh, whoa.
That's all stuff that people are sending.
That's cool.
And I feel it's the same thing. I mean, people will call me or write to me and say, I have this, and I don't know anyone that will actually preserve it. And we will.
We will.
You know, it's what a blessing. God is very clear on preserve it and teach it.
Yeah. He's into posterity. He's not into right now. He's into generations yet to come, which is, our founders had that idea, you know, blessings for ourselves and our posterity. And we're so stinking focused on right now that we often forget about posterity, but history is one of the best things you can pass on to posterity.
I tell you, David, Jefferson, and it's funny because as I started reading the founders, I fall in love with each of them, and then I find another one, and you know, while I'm reading that one, I'm like, this is my favorite. And then I read the other one, and I'm like, no, he's not as good as this one. This one's really good. Jefferson, I think, was the first founder that I fell in love with, and then I had a problem with him because of Ellis, American Sphinx. I started looking at him, and I'm like, and my excuse on the Sally Hemings thing was, a slave, so, you know, back then you would have viewed things as, you would have viewed people as things, and it was a piece of furniture, and so what difference did it make? And I was so confused by that, because here's a guy who's writing, you know, we hold these truths to be self-evident, and it didn't match. And so I was really confused, and I put Jefferson kind of away, which is dangerous, because he's critical.
Yeah, he is.
So
which is why he's so easy to, why he's such a high-profile target to attack.
Right.
Because those ideas, when you get those ideas, you get limited government, you get inalienable rights. You got to get rid of him if you want to move in a progressive direction.
Do you agree that he is the most complex, the hardest one to understand?
I don't think he's the hardest. I think he's one of the hardest. Because I think George Washington is a tough guy to understand at times.
I think he's a piece of cake, really.
But so is Jefferson once you understand him.
Okay.
But because we don't think like they think, I mean, Washington is a complex guy because he does a ton of stuff we don't do today. But once you get into his brain and understand it,
once you understand the one principle, God, he's just driving. God's driving him at all times.
It drives his honesty, integrity. It drives his courage. It drives his duty. You got it.
Okay.
You got it.
So now, what drives Jefferson?
Jefferson's same kind of drive. It's the character, but it all goes back to God. And so for him,
you would never hear this from
any historian.
You never hear that.
No,
never.
You don't hear that. Matter of fact, right now, the Smithsonian has a new thing out on Jefferson called the Jefferson Bible. The Jefferson Bible is out there bringing forth Jefferson, except they're reinterpreting the entire. I mean, Jefferson's really clear on what he did. He has 19,000 letters. I don't know how many I've got, but it's not 19,000. No. So Jefferson writes about everything he did. He tells us about it, and the Smithsonian ignores everything he said to put their own spin on it.
Isn't it really interesting? If I'm not mistaken, Jefferson, I'm pretty sure I read someplace that Jefferson believed that the only way to truly understand a man is to read his correspondence to and from.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
So you're saying they're ignoring all of this correspondence. They're ignoring everything that he wrote which is exactly what he said is the only way to understand it.
Even Smithsonian, and talking about Jefferson, they talk about how he was anti-religious. He cut out the stuff he didn't believe with, and he talked about how that the morals of Jesus you could separate like diamonds from dunghill. Sorry, you've just crossed about 20 years of his letters and writings. You've taken a phrase out of a whole bunch of letters, had nothing to do with this, and you pulled them together in the Smithsonian exhibit to say, here's what Jefferson believed about this issue. And if you know the letters and you read his letters, you recognize exactly what they did. And this is a big deal to me because it's one of the easiest for me to shoot at. Because particularly even people of faith say, well, I would like Jefferson, but you know, he's that guy who cut up the Bible. He didn't like the Jesus, and he didn't like, so he cut. Nonsense. That's not what happened.
So which one is this? Is this the teaching?
This is the second one.
This is the one. This is at 18.
This 1820.
1820.
He started this in about 1804.
Explain this, the two Bibles, because most people don't understand this. What you've heard, I'll say what most people have heard, because I believe this to be true until I'm reading your book. That Jefferson didn't like the magic tricks, didn't like the whole God thing, liked the teachings of Jesus. Yep. And so he cut the Bible up from different versions or different languages and put his little Bible together, and that's what he believed. And that way he could become a Christian.
That's right, by his own definition.
Right.
All wrong. You have to start with Jefferson first, back before he became president, very involved in Indian missions and in getting Christianity to Indians. As governor of Virginia.
See, this is where Ellis gets you. He's a sphinx.
Yeah.
He does one thing, but it doesn't match the other.
Yeah.
It's all really on slavery that he builds that whole case.
He's
sending missionaries out to the Indians, but he doesn't really believe it.
Well, he does.
Makes sense.
Because he does it his whole life, which is the one thing that you can point out. If somebody really doesn't believe it, they'll do it for an instant, and they'll always point back to it, but they'll never do it again and again and again. They'll always, oh, yeah, I believe that. Jefferson has a consistent track record of working with missionaries to the Indians, working with ministers who go to the Indians, doing mission work with Indians. And he read a sermon in about 1803 from a Scotch guy who said, you know, if you're going to really reach the Indians, and instead of giving this big old Bible that we use, let's give them an abridgment of the Bible that focuses on Jesus Christ alone. So Jefferson said, that's a great idea. You can, instead of paying how many bucks to print a Bible, you can do an abridgment really short. You can get all the life of Jesus in there. So what he did, he took 2 Bibles out of the White House. He did take a knife, and he cut out all the passages, some out of Matthew, some out of Mark, some out of Luke, some out of John.
Jim Wallace.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the way they spend it today.
Yeah.
But he took, and when you paste them all together, you get the full life of Jesus. Now, people say, oh, he cut out the stuff he didn't disagree with. There's no miraculous, the magic tricks.
Yeah,
there's no miraculous
miracles
stuff in there. I've had people tell me that this week, and I said, have you ever read that work? No, I've never. Well, how do you know what he cut out? Well, that's what everybody says. Thank you very much. Read it. It's full of miracles. Jesus is raising people from the dead. He's healing the sick. He's casting out lepers. He's taking food, multiplying it for thousands. He also talks about the resurrection. He also talks about heaven, hell, the second coming, the Son of God. It's all there. What he did was make what we call a synoptic gospel. He took the 4 gospels, and instead of repeating things, he said, here's the highlights of them, and you put it together, and he gave it to the missionaries, and he called it his wee little book. He said, now, take this, you can reproduce it for your missionary work among the Indians. This will get the gospel to the Indians.
This is you immediately get a totally different understanding of Jefferson.
Well, and this is it's a little. This is an original paper from 1803.
Jeez.
The reason I have this is on the second page. It has, and you know, it's worth doing. So I'm gonna.
This is 1804.
1804. All right, 1804. It's an 1803 treaty that he did in 1804. Here's the deal. It's delicate, but let's do it. I'm going to pull this out.
I'll pull this out.
Okay, let's lay it on top.
Yep. Can you get the jib up above here? Yeah.
Okay, so we get here.
David, why don't you come around a bit so the light casts on it? So
you're going to, yeah, there you go. You're going to see signed by Thomas Jefferson, President, and Secretary of State James Madison.
Published by authority of the President of the United States, a proclamation. It's 3 columns long.
And what you get here, signed by Jefferson, it's a treaty with the Kaskaskia Indians. And in the treaty, he goes through and says, here's the treaty we just made, public record, letting everybody see it. Part of the treaty, he talks about the fact that they just gave federal funds to send missionaries to the Indians, and they also used federal funds to build a church for the Indians. Now, if a guy's looking for rhetoric only, he's not going to put federal funds into missionaries. He's not going to put federal funds into building a church for the Indians. I mean, we can't even get faith-based stuff done today because Thomas Jefferson doesn't want it. And it's signed by James Madison as well. You see Secretary of State right there, Thomas Jefferson, President right there, the end of the treaty.
I mean, this is amazing. And whereas the greater part of the tribe had been baptized and received into the Catholic Church. So, I mean, just reading it out of context, I mean, you would think that even, he would be really anti-Catholic.
Oh, he's not. Because he understands that the teachings of Jesus change you, period. And so he is really happy to help the Catholic Church go on. And he's funding, and the Kaskaskia tribe said, we've become Catholics. We would like some Catholic missionaries. We'll fund you some missionaries. Here's some Catholic priests for your tribe. And by the way, we'll build you a Catholic church in which to worship.
That's unbelievable.
Now, you know, you read this kind of stuff, and then you see the Jefferson Bible, and you see his purpose, where he said, I've done this so you can give it to the Indians. It contains the life. It contains the teachings of Jesus. You know, where's this Jefferson Bible stuff that we keep hearing about? Now, this is the second one, and this is the one the Smithsonian's got out. And, yeah, thank you. He started that at about the same time. This was 1803 with the treaty, but 1804 with the Jefferson Bible. This started about the same time, and it's while he's president. He hasn't entered his second term yet, and the deal is so many of the problems we got in the nation can be solved with some morality. So solve it with morality, fix the problems, fix the morality, and looking to do that, he studied 30 different moral teachers. He went, this blows my mind, he went back and read the writings of Pythagoras. Now, I was a math guy. I thought Pythagoras was a math guy. I didn't know he had moral teachings. He read the teachings, moral teachings of Pythagoras, of Seneca, of Plutarch. He read the moral teachings of Aristotle. He read the moral teachings of Plato. Guys I've never even heard of past that. And he says, Jesus' moral teachings are so much better than any of those guys. So what he did was, from a social standpoint, he said, what are the teachings that if we could live by would change the culture, change the country, make it a great place to live? And he went through and found 50 moral teachings of Jesus, cut them out of his Bible, pasted them end to end so you could read the moral teachings of Jesus.
This is the original first edition?
Now, this is original in an interesting way. What you're seeing on the screen is the Library of Congress. It looks just like this. Congress reprinted it. Now, this...
Congress
what's this?
Printed.
You're going to like this. Let's go to the first page here, and we'll go to it and see what it says down there.
1904, Government Printing Office.
Now, they started it in 1902. This is the 1904 version, and see, it's out of the House of Representatives. It's signed by a member of Congress.
To my precious right eye, commonly known as Catherine Dwyer, who I'm under great obligation for her wonderful help in these days of my blindness.
And see what it is here is 1943. So this is a member of Congress. He signed that thing 40 years after it was printed. Congress gave this out to every member of Congress for 50 straight years. Now, what it is, let's go over here to Jefferson's writings. This is Jefferson's handwriting. It tells you every one of the moral teachings that he listed of Jesus here, what Gospels have them, etc. So then he takes them and he calls it the life and morals of Jesus of Nazareth. All it is...
This is remarkable.
...is the teachings of Jesus on morality. Now, Jefferson... Oops, I'm sorry.
No, don't worry about it.
Jefferson, right here, you can see the next page. He's done this in 4 languages.
Right.
So he went back and he took not only English, but he took Latin, and he took Greek, and he took French. Now, he spoke, I think, 8 languages. He read 11. So he reads the moral teachings of Jesus in 4 different versions, that this is how we should live our life. Who's going to object to the Good Samaritan, the Golden Rule, forgive your enemies, turn the other cheek? That's what he does. He said this is what every citizen needs to know.
So the government gave this, when you went to Congress...
50 years.
For 50 years, they gave this to you.
You get sworn in, they say, hey, you're a congressman, live your life by this. If
the government did this.
Government did this. U.S. government, live your life by this. This is the way every citizen should behave and act. Why, he cut out everything he disagreed with. No. He took the 50 moral teachings of Jesus and said, this is how you should live your life as a citizen.
Unbelievable. Okay, one more thing. We'll get to this when we come back. So this is what they were giving you when you sworn into office.
That's right.
This is what Keith Ellison was sworn in on.
Well, actually, that's the American edition. He was sworn in on Jefferson's personal version. Jefferson had a personal version from 1746.
Okay.
This is 60 years later, the Jefferson administration, this is the edition.
Okay, so this is the Koran from I think this was
1806, I think.
Yeah, I think this one.
Jefferson is President of the United States.
Yeah, 1806. Why do I doubt him? Yeah, 1806. I knew that. He'll get into this next and a little bit more of this book. Go out and buy this book right now. Go online and buy this book. Do you sell this
no,
online?
We don't. We don't sell that online. Congress hadn't reprinted that since, back in the day.
All right. This is the Jefferson Lies. And you should get that for the liberal that you know and go, you know what? He was a bad guy. All the lies of Jefferson are right in here. Let them read it and be surprised. David Barton next. We have talked before about the Jefferson Koran, so I want to hit it just briefly, but I find it one of the most fascinating stories ever. Go ahead.
1783, we signed the peace treaty to end the American Revolution. 1784, we've had a problem going on we got to deal with, and it's attacks by Islamic terrorists on American interest overseas. 1784, Congress dispatches 3 diplomats to go deal with Islamic terrorists. It's Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, and John Adams. They go to 5 different Islamic nations that are attacking American ships overseas. And after 2 years, Jefferson and Adams build a relationship of trust with one of these Muslim ambassadors. And Jefferson just says, all right, why do you guys attack us? We've never done anything to you. Why are you determined to kill our sailors and take our ships and enslave our... we've done nothing. And the ambassador looks at Jefferson and says, well, it's because our Koran commands us to do this. We're commanded to make war on you, and everyone who does is going to go to heaven. And Jefferson's like, wait a minute, time out. You mean you go to heaven for killing people? Your book said... So Jefferson goes and buys a Koran and reads it. And that's a 1746 version of the Koran. It's like, I cannot believe what I'm hearing here. And he always told his nephew, Peter Carr, don't buy what other people say. You go read it for yourself. You check. That's where he says, question with boldness the existence of God. And he says, if you do, you're going to find there is a God, but you need to know yourself why that is. So Jefferson buys a Koran. He becomes president of the United States. At that point, we're still fighting these Muslim terrorists. 20 years later, essentially, and in 1801, when he's president, 20% of the federal budget is being spent every year on fighting these terrorists. He said, I've had it. He takes the Navy. He loads the Marines on the Navy, sends them overseas. That's where the Marine Corps gets their hymn, from the halls of Montezuma, shores of Tripoli. 5 years we fight Islamic terrorists, finally subdue them. They finally say, okay, we give up. We'll leave America alone. They come back home. That's when this Koran is printed. This Koran comes in the end of 5 years of war, expensive, we've lost lives, it's cost a lot of time. Americans say, why did we fight this war? And so they publish this and say, well, if you want to know why we fought the war, read the Koran. So the first American edition of the Koran is here. And what's interesting is the publisher's note here at the beginning where it says, to the reader. At the end it says, you want to know why we just had 5 years of war? It says, when you read this, you'll wonder at the absurdities that have affected the greater part of the world. It said, you won't believe what's in this book. And this is why we had to go to war, because people believe this.
How widespread was this book?
It was fairly widespread. And it was pretty popular because we'd just come out of a war against Islamic terrorists. And so this is another...
This has all been erased.
Well, it's not politically correct today.
I know. Okay, so David, I mean, we have to have you back. The book is absolutely tremendous, and it sets Jefferson back into his rightful place. We have 4 minutes left. I think the Sally Hemings thing.
Yep.
But we've already done that once on an episode. But we could probably hit the highlights of that. Is there anything else that you think is this is important to set?
The Sally Hemings one, because exactly your reaction when we were talking about this. Well, he owned slaves, and of course that's the way you treat slaves. Time out. Why did Jefferson have slaves? Because when he was 13 years old, he inherited 187 slaves. So he's a 13-year-old kid with 187. Get rid of the slaves. Virginia law made it illegal to release your slaves. He's now a 13-year-old kid that's inherited 187 slaves. By the law, he cannot release them. Now, Washington released his slaves on his death. And that's a great deal, except the Virginia legislature goes, didn't see that one. They closed loophole. You couldn't even release. When Jefferson was alive, you could not even release your slaves on your death. So wow. Jefferson has got now 187 plus more slaves, and what do you do with that? Well, he pays them for what they do. Find other slave owners paying them for what they do. He introduced the first anti-slavery law in the United States in the Continental Congress, failed by 1 vote. Here's a slave owner trying to ban slavery in the whole country. He introduced it in his state legislature. He kept introducing it. He got his brains bit in for doing so. Throughout his entire tenure of life, he is the most adamant anti-slavery guy that there is, but he's not allowed to free his own slaves. So we look at him and say, he owned slaves. Well, that shows how twisted he was. No, he did write that all men are created equal because he believed that.
If I'm not mistaken, it's been years since I've read it, but I believe Ellis said that the reason why he kept his slaves is because he was a big drinker and a big spender, and he was broke, and he needed to have the slaves to keep Monticello going.
No, he was a big spender because he was paying his slaves for the work they did, which put him into such dire straits that he ended up having to sell his library to Congress to make some money to keep things running. But it wasn't because he's a big spender. You read his account books. Now, if he's a big spender, it's because he's very charitable. He gave away a lot of money to charity, a lot of money to poor folks, a lot of money to veterans.
Did he not have lavish parties? Did he not have very expensive wines shipped over?
He had some of that, but that was not a lifestyle. It is a lifestyle, and that's what you did at a plantation level. That's what you did, entertaining the kind of dignitaries he did. He was the governor of the state. You bring in the people. You have that kind of lifestyle, no question. As far as being a lavish guy himself, no. He was so modest in so many ways. Funny stories, riding through D.C. as President of the United States on his horse, people didn't even know he was president. You know, they didn't even recognize him, and they would talk to him, and one guy chewed him up and said, man, the president is a real jerk kind of thing. And it was Jefferson talking to him, and the guy found out it was Jefferson and said, you're a really nice guy. You're not what I've heard about. And so Jefferson is a really non-pretentious guy. He did so many things for common people. He never wanted them to know that he had done those things. He's just non-pretentious. Very good guy.
Who's next after Jefferson?
For us?
Yeah, who's next?
Our next project is actually Faith of the Founders with what's called a Founder's Bible. We're just taking the Bible and letting the Founding Fathers comment on all the verses, because they so much write about what the Bible says that we thought that's the best Bible to bring out, is one with commentaries by the guys that applied it to government, applied it to life, to education, to culture, to military, to, you know, war on terrorism, whatever. So that's where we are now.
I learned so much from George Washington, where he can write and speak in ways that nobody even knows he's quoting the Bible, but he was.
I have a blast. I put 2 sentences from Washington up that have 10 Bible verses and nobody recognizes them.
I know.
10 Bible, 2 sentences.
I know. All right, David, thank you very much.
Thanks, Glenn.
The name of the book is The Jefferson Lies by David Barton. Well worth the time to read and share it with as many people as you know. David Barton and wallbuilders.com.